Hello friends, welcome to Houseplant Tips and Tricks. My name is Nick and today we're going to be doing some underplanting with indoor plants. This series is sponsored by repotme.com. Get all of your indoor gardening supplies delivered to your door from one place. Repotme.com has practically anything you need for your orchids, succulents, and houseplants, including handmade potting mixes, planters, fertilizers, and much more. Underplanting is typically something you'll see with outdoor gardening. It's essentially just having a large tree or plant and using smaller plants to fill in that empty soil space on the surface below. And there's no reason you can't do it with indoor gardening. We're just used to planting one plant per pot when it comes to houseplants. But when you're working with large trees like this Dracaena right here, or think like a ficus, like the standard ficus trees that have the trunk that goes up like 3 feet, and all the trees up here can look kind of bare and, dare I say, boring inside the pot if it's just a bunch of soil. You can use top dressings, that's totally fine, but it's kind of more fun to use more plants, to grow more plants in one pot, and can be pretty beneficial, especially if you're working with a larger planter. Typically large plants have large planters, and those can hold on to moisture for sometimes too long depending on what kind of soil you're using and what the material is made of. So if you're working with plants specifically like ficus, that overwatering or heavy hand could be the kiss of death for it. Using plants inside the planter to help regulate the amount of moisture that's sitting inside the planter could really help you out. So today we're going to be planting up this Dracaena Golden Coast that I have back here. It's rather large, as tall as me. As you can see, it's definitely going to be off camera once we get it up on the table. And we are going to do some underplanting with some of these low-lying trailing houseplants. I have a neon pothos right here, and also this Jade Satin Scindapsus. If we need more plants, I'm sure we can find something around my home to use, but I figured it'd be kind of fun to play with the yellow and green colors of this Dracaena with the yellow and green colors of these plants. We have our planter that we're using. This is just the planter that my plant has been sitting inside. The holes in this planter are pretty big, as you can see, and there's 3 of them. Usually I'm just like, whatever, I'm just gonna let things happen. It's gonna settle eventually, but those are pretty big. I do not want my soil to just come out, so I have cut the bottom off of a planter, a plastic planter that just has a bunch of holes in it, as you can see. A great way to use, I feel like I'm using some of my trash. I don't know what to do with the rest of the plastic planter, but still, it makes me feel better I'm using something, so I'm just gonna use this as a little bit of little covering of the holes. You could use like a cut up piece of mesh, something, I'm sure, but this is just something I already have on hand and I don't have to go out and get anything else. We're gonna have to create some soil as well. You could use some soil straight from the bag for the plants that we're working with today. They're not that finicky, but just since it's such a large planter, I do want to add some extra drainage into the mixture. So on my little mixing bowl here, I'm going to add some Houseplant and Tropical Classic Mix from repotme.com. I'm gonna leave all the products that I'm using from repotme.com linked in my description below. If you click through any of those links and make any purchases, I do earn a commission, so thank you very much in advance. And you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix from repotme.com. So I filled up this bowl like 3/4 of the way with the classic mix, and I'm gonna add just a small amount of perlite and orchid bark. It's not the most necessary thing with the plants we're working with, but I still would prefer for them to have some extra drainage. I've got our ingredients, I've got my spoon, my favorite gardening tool. All of my gardening tools are kitchen utensils. I'm just making sure this is as evenly combined as possible. Making sure to scoop up from the bottom. Amazing. We can just dump a little bit of this in there to get started, just like an inch or 2 in the bottom. Let's make a little bit of room for our Dracaena and get this bad girl up here. So this is a Dracaena Fragrans Golden Coast. Dracaenas don't really have the most robust root systems. This has been sitting in here for at least a couple years now. In my possession, only about 2 years, but I'm sure this has been growing in a nursery for at least a year or 2 prior. So I'm just saying we might find a little bit more roots in here than what you might find if you just freshly purchased one of these or another plant from the nursery. Remove some of these dead leaves I'm finding in the bottom of the planter before we get planting. I can just throw them inside my little tray here, my repotting tray from repotme.com, which comes in so much handy anytime I'm doing repotting, whether on my table here for you guys or just on my floor by myself. So convenient. Just using another one of my kitchen utensils to loosen up this plant. And let's safely pull this guy up and out. Nice. All right, we do have a really nice root system, especially for a Dracaena. I'm gonna be making a mess as always. That's why we own a vacuum. So I'm just lightly teasing these roots. It's not the biggest deal, but just want them to know it's time to explore. Let's go ahead and place this inside and see how our soil level is looking. It's not too bad. We're about 1.5 inches below the lip of the planter. I think I want it to be a little bit lower than that, maybe like 2 inches lower. So I am going to just throw him back, or her. I think we've already gendered this plant as a her, and throw it back in here, and then just remove a little bit, like a half an inch of the soil that we have already sitting in here. Fully for aesthetic purposes, the height that it was at was totally fine. All right, let's get her back in. All right, cool. That's feeling a lot better. I know I'm gonna be a little bit hidden. I know this tree is gonna be out of frame. Just bear with me, okay? So we're gonna start to remove some of the soil from the surface of this plant. So I'm just kind of like digging down a little bit in the center, basically where I'm not gonna find that much roots, because these are spaces where we can start to place in our other plants. But I'm really happy with the shape and the spacing of these, so I don't wanna mess with it too much. We just wanna allow for us to be doing some work on the surface. So this is how we're looking. We got our 3 little mounds. The way that I like to have this plant set up, I have it in the corner of my bedroom, and the tallest one, which is the one definitely the most off camera, but in the back towards me here, is the one that I like up against the back or in the corner. So I would say that this is going to be the front here. So we're just going to be keeping that in mind in the way that we are placing our plants inside. We can get rid of this, and then let's bring in our neon pothos here. So this is obviously a lot of plants in one pot. It's probably like 50 plus cuttings. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it's like 20 to 30 cuttings. It's a lot of plant in here. We can all agree on that. And we're unfortunately not going to be able to just place this directly in there because there's all these roots going on. We're not going to be able to fit in this plant here. You could probably fit a small little plant in here, but that's not really going to do very much aesthetically. So what we're going to do with this is we are going to divide it. We're going to propagate by division, but it's not really, like the internet would call this propagating by division, but we're literally just separating a bunch of plants that have already been grown, rooted up separately. You can see right here, this little piece just fell out right here. It's two little cuttings right here we can put aside. They can fit in wherever. The more pieces that we have, the more we have to work with and to fill in the gaps in our planter here. You could also save yourself this minor headache by buying like all 4-inch pots and just placing them in how you want to. You can just save yourself some money if you buy a larger hanging basket and separate it. There's actually a very loose soil mix that the growers were using with this, so it's making my job a lot easier. It's coming apart very easily. The only issue is just untangling the vines since there's so many of them. So a piece right here. I'm just gonna throw it in here for the time being. Got another large piece right here. Once again, can separate this into maybe like 2 or 3 little pieces. Oh, I definitely have a lot to work with today. I do not think we're gonna need to go salvaging for any other plants. In fact, we could probably just do entirely all this neon pothos in here and it would look totally fine, but I just like the idea of having a little pop of the Jade Satin pothos. I think I kind of want to position it so the Jade Satin's like near the front, kind of poking out, and then the rest of it's neon pothos. This is going to lay a little bit more flat than the neon pothos. They will have slightly different like demeanors, but I still think it's going to work very well aesthetically. So let's get all these cuttings out, avoid tangling them again any more than they've been. And let's start off with getting, like I was just saying, our Jade Satin pothos. Let's decide where we want this to sit. These in the past were super popular houseplants. I'm sure they're still pretty popular now, but I thought this would be fun to have a little pop of in here just because I love throwing in a little exciting plant wherever I can into arrangements. Honestly fits perfectly right here. And I like that it's hanging out beneath the middle one and not right next to the lower one because this might be where my eyes are drawn to immediately. This is the middle child right here. Nobody thinks about the middle child. So sorry. So we're gonna give the middle child some extra attention with this beautiful Jade Satin pothos. Let's take one of our bunches and start just filling in the gaps. It's all a gap right now. Let's start filling it in. I have some of these pieces that are vining a bit. I could put them over the edge if I wanted to go for that vibe, but I'm more focused on having a more full plant on the inside of the planter. So I'm gonna kind of have these where they're kind of following the curve of the planter, sitting on the surface of the soil inside the planter. And now that we have this little section getting started right here, let's get some of our soil. And we're gonna just pour some soil into the front of the planter here just to keep things a little bit more in place. Be much easier than once we have all these plants set in here and we're trying to pour soil in through the little cracks. We strive for headache reduction here. It's part of the tips and tricks. I do have so many vines. I could do like some spillage, but I think I'd rather set it up for future spillage, like the trailing over the ends of the pots. I think like I said, I'd rather focus on filling up the interior of this planter. Alrighty, our perimeter is looking pretty stuffed to the gills. So let's throw these last few pieces in the center here, and we'll call it a planting. This one really wants to be spilling, so maybe we'll make a little spot right here to have one little itsy bitsy little spiller. Cute. And let's just make a little bit more soil because we got fill a little bit more on top. I guess we could use, no, let's just make our own. I was gonna say we could use some of the soil from the neon pothos, but let's keep it fresh to death. Don't need to make that much. Let's just really make sure that we have all those little air pockets filled up. It's a lot easier to miss some of those spaces when you're working with a much larger planter like this. But whenever I'm concerned about any extra air pockets where I don't know, I just rely on my age-old method of pot spanking. I always spank the pot too hard and the camera shakes, so I'm trying to rein it in today. I don't know, I had this little trailer here, but now I just want to stuff them inside. I think that looks better for now. This looks really nice. It's definitely just chock full of golden pothos, with a little pop of the green Scindapsus. I'm gonna take my fingers and just stick them in around the perimeter of our pot to make sure, oh, there's a little air bubble right there, just to discover any culprits. It's feeling pretty good. I'm so happy about this. It's gonna look so much better than if I just planted this in here and it was just dirt. I think we could all agree on that. I should have talked about some of this stuff earlier, but when you're doing underplanting indoors, you of course need to make sure that the plants you are working with have similar care needs. They don't have to have the same exact care requirements, but similar lighting needs, similar watering needs. Like you wouldn't plant a fern with a cactus, you know what I mean? Like it's just not gonna work out. Totally different lighting situations, totally different watering situations. But this Dracaena is a medium light plant that likes waterings like every now and again, and this Pothos and Scindapsus are the same exact way. Medium light plants handle waterings every now and again. So this is gonna work out very, very well. So just do a little bit of research there, make sure the requirements are similar. But when you are working with more plants in an arrangement like this, if one plant does go, like if the Scindapsus does take a dive randomly, it's no big deal. I can just replace it with something else. Of course, we want our plants to thrive. It's just better than when you have one plant in a pot and it dies and you're left with an empty pot. We still will have more plants if one of these doesn't make it, and it's just a trial and error situation from there. But I think we're gonna have some pretty smooth sailing with the ones we've chosen today. But that's going to do it for this beautiful journey of repotting this beautiful mess today. I'm absolutely in love with the way it turned out. I love the color of this neon pothos with this planter, the little pop, dare I say. Normally it's not a pop when it's just dark green, but in this situation it's a little pop of plain green, and the way it's looking with the colors on my Dracaena, I really, really like the little color story that this planter right here is telling you. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to repotme.com for sponsoring this video and this series. As I mentioned, I will leave any of the products that I used from repotme.com linked in my description below, and if you click through any of those links, I will earn a commission. So thank you again. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at phillyfoliage. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great time.